Welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amal. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch and you have a full stomach, ready to get some alpha from these investors. So quick introductions. I'm Lisa. I'm the COO at Aztec. I've been at the company now for 4 years, which makes me an OG and a dinosaur in crypto. And then in addition, I also am an investor with a fund that I run on the side called Credibly Neutral. We've invested over the past 3 years, mostly in early stage companies, in infrastructure and software in the crypto space.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm Praneeth. I'm one of the founding partners at Ethereal Ventures, which is a firm was formed by what constituted the former venture investment team at Consensus. So our thesis is, again, to fundamentally back really strong domain experts and technical teams building essentially what could be new paradigms for collaboration. And we've had the pleasure of, and also actually the fortune of having invested in Aztec through Consensus, through Ethereal, and very, very stoked to see and support them on their journey.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. My name is Alex. I'm the founding partner at Inflection, an early stage venture firm operating out of the US and Europe. We are investing in the earliest stages, pre-seed and seed, around a thesis built upon what we call sovereign computation. So that's basically all kinds of physical, digital technologies that are allowing people to manage critical resources. And that spans a lot of different fields. We are interested in solving scaling issues by investing into alternative compute methods or specialized silicon companies, as an example. We are interested in solving resilience issues with the compute stack, and that includes distributed systems, blockchain cryptography. And the third one is what we call flow, so everything that enables or unlocks novel types of data, sensing technologies, data markets, etc. Looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Cool. And I just want to do a quick sound check before we get into it. Do you guys hear us? We're talking into the mics? Okay, great. If you're talking in the back, please, we have tons of space around, so just want to make sure that everyone can hear. Thank you. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk a lot about privacy, and privacy is not new. I know everyone here is excited about privacy. Maybe you're early on your journey, maybe you've been on it for a while, maybe you were an early user of Monero back in the day. There's lots of privacy projects that have emerged over the past almost 15 years in the crypto space, basically. Bitcoin was talking about privacy very early. So what's your take on kind of what's your vision of where privacy will go in this space, and where are we on that journey?
I would probably say that the journey of privacy as such somewhat mirrors what we've seen also in the crypto space, as it fundamentally relates to the origins and the mindsets from which privacy kind of came about, how it was essentially a political tool to start with, but one that essentially slowly started becoming mainstream in one way, shape, and sense. And so there's it's obviously a very it's a topic that can have a lot of complex underpinnings, but the notion of privacy is something that I feel like as humans we fundamentally ensconce in all aspects of our life. We choose to reveal specific facets of information to other people, and we make this judgment innately, and we see that not only on a day-to-day basis but also in for instance the workplace, and so it is something that we somewhat take for granted. But I think the notion that privacy as a category is new is probably not something that I would think about, because privacy has been existent for a while. The question is whether investing in privacy and whether privacy is commercial and can have commercial success is the question. And I think we probably are at a point where we have a lot of the tooling available to make it so.
Cool. Yeah, for me, I don't see privacy as something static, but rather evolving and very cyclic. If you look back at previous waves of technologies, and in particular communications technologies, was what happened, between telegraphs, telephones, early internet, was usually a period of implementation going on for a decade or a couple decades. That was often framed as Wild West, and didn't have any strong privacy protections in place. So phone wires were open, very easy to eavesdrop on. The internet was very vulnerable before, or email PGP was invented. Similar with other layers in the stack, and I think it won't be much different in crypto land as a novel type of database infrastructure, compute platform, however you frame it. That this is lagging, but will also unlock a lot of I think new markets, in particular in the enterprise environment. We might touch on that later. So yeah, it's lagging. The trend is going up and to the right because it will be a necessity. So that's what I see for crypto, only in the sense of the blockchain ecosystem. Taking another step back, I'm very concerned about a bigger cycle. So if you look at privacy as a tool for distributing power amongst individuals, what we've also seen is that in periods of conflict, be it World War I, World War II, throughout the Cold War, 9/11 as an example, maybe Ukraine, usually whenever you have these kinds of existential threats to countries or societies, privacy erodes, and the state becomes more powerful, implements stronger surveillance and censorship mechanisms, and at the same time is increasing its own secrecy to stay safe, so to speak. So that's a counter trend I'm seeing more in a multi-decade time horizon. Very curious to discuss this also with anyone in the audience who's interested.
I was also just thinking right now that it's possibly even the bandwidth of information dissemination and about that as being a particular feature for essentially having privacy. So the thinking that I had was it was probably easier to remain private when it was harder to disseminate information as such. But now that we do have the bandwidth available to actually make information more broadly available, there's very limited mechanisms for us to actually truly own the information that we do contain. And it becomes extremely easy for third parties to essentially capture this, at which point it is probably important to actually have privacy as a core substrate for the technology stack that we operate with.
It's very much like a tragedy of the commons, almost, where if an individual gives up on privacy to get some convenience or a service for free or so, doesn't have much of an effect. But as long as enterprises have an incentive to capture that information, and as long as most individuals give up the more individuals give up privacy, the more the effects compound on the collective level and erodes it for the entire group. So yeah, that's a bit the status quo, unfortunately.
Well, you started talking about the communication stack, and I was thinking through analogies made between just crypto in general and the internet, and kind of where we are in that cycle. It's encouraging to hear it's usually a decades-long cycle, because sometimes it feels like we've been doing this for a while. But one of the things that I think is helpful is to think about analogies for what privacy or encryption could unlock, and for the internet, SSL certificates, encryption for payments, that unlocked e-commerce. And so that's a much more positive framing for it's not just privacy for privacy's sake, it's you need it. And I think about Aztec really similarly. It's how could we imagine replacing the financial rails of the existing system if we don't have privacy? That sounds so dystopian to me. Sometimes I've told my teammates before, but it energizes me. If I'm thinking about the world without Aztec, I'm that shouldn't exist. That's impossible. And so I'm just curious if there's any other analogies that you look to. You kind of mentioned some historical references that you think about when you think about how privacy might come to this space and what it could unlock.
I could probably just say that blockchains are a medium for changing the trust paradigm and the way we think about trusting one another. It is fundamentally harder to do that on digital substrates, but with the notion of cryptographic tools that do enable us to verify the veracity of the statements we are making to each other, and the acts that we are performing, which is essentially verifiable computation, but still having the ability to selectively disclose parts that make sense. I think it essentially is, to your point, unlocking a new form of commerce, but without resorting to an Orwellian, I guess, or dystopian world where things are very, very monopolized, or we end up resorting to a surveillance state.
It's really like a third path almost. Like historically, you rather had two options. Either you're very transparent, that makes it easy to trust you, right? If I'm revealing everything to everybody, it's easy to trust me because you have all that context and might see my agenda publicly. If I'm completely in stealth, it's very, very hard to trust me or any other counterparty. And now we, for the first time, really have the opportunity to have both, like have privacy and trust through verifications of different sorts. That is fundamentally interesting, and I think will find its way into the mainstream technology stack.
Cool. So let's make it. We were talking a lot about the macro and kind of like privacy generally. Let's make it more tangible in terms of like your personal experience with privacy and investing in this space. Tell us a little bit more about like investments that you've made and maybe how your thesis has evolved over time.
I would probably say that the investments we have made in privacy have been related to privacy infrastructure that could essentially create the primitives for people to collaborate privately, because that is something that has not existed broadly and at scale.
How long ago was that? Like, in terms of time frames? Like, when did you start thinking about privacy as a place to even invest, or something to even invest in? And then, like, where is that relative to today?
So I think it fundamentally again boils down to who requires privacy as part of the workflows. And so the natural answer is institutions and institutional workflows. Like we natively adopt different levels of privacy when we are choosing to collaborate within an organization or with other organizations. And so when you think about enterprises looking to work with blockchains and blockchain stacks, they would at some point recognize the need to have this embedded in their workflows. And so I guess this was back in the day when Aztec was working on a very different proposition called Creditment, which was essentially a platform for financial institutions to interact with each other in a mechanism that actually required privacy. But it was back in the day that Aztec had realized that there were no primitives, and it was thanks to the pioneering work of Zach and a lot of the team at Aztec that we've actually managed to create a lot of these underpinning primitives that enable us to start even thinking about constructing something that could be construed as private from a software standpoint. And so when we think about privacy today, I think we feel that there's a few of these building blocks that have been put in place. There might be space for a few more, but now that we are actually seeing, taking a step back again, that institutions are actively interested in utilizing blockchains for asset issuance, for settlement, it is very important for them to actually have stacks that can fulfill their requirements. And this is something that we see as an actual demand that is coming from institutions. And so for us, I think this could not be better time to actually start looking at founders who are building for meeting the requirements of these institutions and actually fulfilling their needs as such.
Is there anything? Oh, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think the last point is very, very critical. The needs of the organization. So it's always contextual, right? You try to solve a particular problem for a particular group of people. I think a mistake the ecosystem made through the years was building very horizontal kind of generalist platforms where it was unclear what the exact circumstances of the users are, so it was somehow detached from products and use cases. We can touch deeper on that. And my own journey I think began with a misunderstanding. I was spending some time with Adam Stradling. I don't know if people know him here. He co-founded TradeHill, one of the first Bitcoin exchanges in 2011, and Eric Voorhees later on. And they both agreed that Bitcoin actually was not as anonymous as I was thinking at that time. So I made the assumption that pseudonymous means anonymous until the first de-anonymization services came out. And that has an effect on the properties of money, like fungibility, especially. Like if one Bitcoin or one monetary unit is somehow labeled as, to criminal activity or whatever. We've seen it in mining as well. Lots of problems around ETF launches with fungibility if these coins were tainted in a way. So that was the start into the problem, and then I looked deep into Zcash and Monero early on. Grin rings a bell. But it has been evolving a lot, and I think today the ecosystem is approaching it in a different, more increasingly pragmatic way.
Was there any thesis that you had that didn't play out, or things that played out differently than you expected?
Certainly. I wonder what actually played out the way I thought at the time. I think one big shift is moving away from these very abstracted generalist infrastructures, especially alt layer ones that simply didn't find the adoption. I don't know about the wallet address counts or transaction volumes, etc. If you just look at market cap, I think the privacy-preserving L1s currently have 1% of the market cap in crypto assets. What is tiny. I think there will be much more abstraction in the background through things like Zama, or an equivalent of what Privy was doing for wallet architecture that is abstracting away the complexity and is integrated into a service that does something totally unrelated to privacy.
I think one thing that comes to mind personally is I think we were spurred by the success of Aztec, which has been around for a while, but I think we were broadly of the opinion that since Aztec is essentially building the tools for enabling private state, there could be extensions to the same, and fundamentally in the process which could enable multiple parties to collaborate with each other in a privacy preserving manner. And so I think we invested in essentially a provider that was basically doing secure multi-party computation primarily for auctions, and trying to basically say hey, this is something that financial institutions who are running dark pools could utilize. And this was back in the day. I think we invested in late 2019. But I guess the fundamental issue was that financial institutions were very happy to essentially be the trusted intermediaries who were actually operating these dark pools. So they trust to run these dark pools, and they were also, I guess, in a position where they were benefiting from the same, from a monetary standpoint and also a trust standpoint. And so there was really no incentive for them to give up this privileged position. And so even though the technology was something that was really powerful and actually could achieve some notion of latency that people required for these transactions to process, it was still the distribution and the incentives for people to pick up this technology was very misaligned, if one might call it. So this company had to repivot, and they're doing something different now. But I see that as a fundamental gap in thinking that even though technology is something that can replace the way we collaborate, there still has to be buy-in from people who are using this as technology and actually see that and see a feasible path for them to actually adopt this.
Yeah, very interesting example. I have a somewhat of a counter example almost. So we're working with a company in Switzerland out of ETH that is called Tuninside and is building at the core a data marketplace for health data using multi-party homomorphic encryption. So they allow the participating actors in their ecosystem to run computations on fully encrypted data at rest, and it's pretty much like a federated learning related setup. But the problem this solves isn't just the privacy and security aspects of it. The problem it primarily solves is to avoid regulation around GDPR, because typically as soon as you need to move data from A to B, you're in the like the GDPR framework applies, and you have to deal with all these complex data sharing agreements, creating 6-digit legal costs, and this is a very concrete monetizable value proposition that they figured out, and there must be examples in other industries where this is similar.
It's like the classic unintended consequences. Like, I don't think when GDPR was created that they were like, oh, we're going to strengthen decentralized privacy, but actually that might solve the problem for these companies. So to your point, like, it's very expensive to set up all the infrastructure to handle this sensitive data and be compliant with GDPR. And so they have the incentive now to look to alternatives where they're actually not holding on to the sensitive data and being able to do these powerful things while the users are still controlling their data. So I guess in terms of your analysis or the way that you approach new investments, is there anything you do differently for privacy investments or ZK investments? Like, do you kind of approach it, or do you have a bias in any direction, or do you like do different, focus on different things during your diligence process?
I mean, having hindsight and the ability to change things in the past is always amazing. But at the very least, I think the focus we have is essentially getting to a notion of privacy that is acceptable and is also enough to satisfy the requirements of customers who will be using these products and services. So for instance, we're working with one of our portfolio companies, which is creating essentially like a stablecoin payments network of sorts. And the idea is enterprise customers definitely require privacy when it comes to payments. But if you can start thinking about tweaking, say, this is probably going into details, but if you can fundamentally change the way you deal with the data model or the state model for Ethereum, and if you can essentially use a notion of permissioning at specific points in the network to ensure that people are not able to access state of accounts that they're not authenticated to access, it ends up becoming a reasonably viable solution that people would be happy to utilize, as opposed to going down the full-blown route of actually having, like a properly functional privacy pool that could essentially function in all of the beautiful ways that cryptography is supposed to enable privacy at every and confidentiality at every level of the stack. So I think it's approaching privacy in a manner which is firstly easily implementable to the point that it actually requires and meets customer requirements, and then thinking about a path forward as to how this can be changed and how this can be re-architected once you do have adoption, and once you actually do get to the point where whatever you have put together is simply not functional.
Yeah, in our case, it's a long long history of investing in that space. So we've been first investors in Modulus Labs, in fabric cryptography. So they're all operating on very different layers of the stack and are having also very different kind of end customers. But yes, taking a step back, I think what was the biggest mistake that our firm made, at least, was to be too obsessed with fancy new technologies and not enough obsessed with the underlying problem that we're solving and identifying exactly who we are solving it for and what the form factors might be. Up until today, like struggling with that a little bit. The temporary framework we try to use is to look at areas that are very, very sensitive, mainly in a security context. So health is one. Military applications are another one where this is really existential, literally, to work out, and leaving aside more consumery applications. Maybe enterprise finance is another area. That is something where we learned a bunch of lessons. So
I think people in this room could probably relate to being obsessed with fancy technology. Like, that's probably what brought a lot of people here today. And what do you think is still missing? Like, what are some of the things that make it maybe not viable from an infrastructure perspective or from a user experience perspective to really have this in the hands of users and solving some of the problems in the verticals that you mentioned? Is there anything that comes to mind that you think would make a big difference in adoption?
The launch of Aztec mainnet.
Too close to home.
No, generally speaking, I think it's honestly very interesting to see the way people have been utilizing zero-knowledge primitives to essentially solve the problems of increasing operating margins and essentially taking away from the pricing power that centralized intermediaries have. Or secondly, utilizing these primitives to essentially achieve regulatory arbitrage and essentially choose to bypass some of the very onerous, at times meaningless requirements that regulators impose, but still comply in spirit with what regulators want and use that as a mechanism to onboard users very quickly. So I think we have been seeing a lot of this in a place that blockchains have been very good at, which is disintermediating financial stacks and access to financial instruments. But this applies not just to, products that we think about when we think about playing with magic internet money, but this actually is applicable to real-world payments, to real-world lending, like wage-backed loans and the like. And we're actually seeing a lot of these companies that are utilizing privacy primitives that have been put forth by companies like Aztec and create very tailored solutions that are addressing the problems that people face on a day-to-day basis, but utilizing these primitives to essentially achieve much better pricing capabilities and scaling capabilities. And this is awesome to see. Like this is what fundamentally blockchain technology enables. And so we're happy to see more of these, and we want to see like builders using these and building point solutions to address these problems.
Yeah, similar vein on my end. I think cost performance trade-offs are still somewhat limiting, and hardware acceleration at scale is probably part of the solution, and will unlock the Jevons paradox, basically saying that whenever a resource gets cheaper to achieve a certain output, then demand for such resource is not decreasing as one would expect, but increasing, because it becomes economically feasible to use the same resource for more use cases. That was developed in the industrial age for oil demand in the light of more efficient combustion engines, and I think it will be very, very similar here. So in the beginning it might be just the private holding of an asset that has the highest value for people. Down the road it might be very high value transactions all the way to low value transactions, and then maybe even non-financial use cases in a like longer time horizon once the costs are coming down significantly enough. And the other one I think is still UX. Praneeth, you're probably much closer to the dev ecosystem, and my knowledge is a bit outdated here, but what I've been hearing is that many like more generalist developers are still struggling to make sense of ZK circuits and their risk profiles and trade-offs. It's a very fragmented ecosystem still, with somewhat esoteric programming languages. Makes it incredibly difficult for anybody to implement this stuff. Unless it's very, very critical for the application, it's unlikely to happen.
Most people don't know about Noir then. I think actually something that's been encouraging is ZK has historically been used for infrastructure and, to your point, building these like general platforms used for scaling. But more and more we're seeing it being integrated into applications and things that actually users are going to be using to, with these general backends. And our hackathon recently, NoirHack, which Praneeth was one of the judges, was a really good example of how ZK can actually be really cool in the user experience flow and can unlock new opportunities for designing new experiences for users. Did you want to say anything about like your experience with NoirHack and kind of your observations from that?
I think again, it's always a question of maturity when it comes to using a particular tool chain, using a particular set of languages and infrastructure that you can kind of think about. In one way, shape, and sense, I think Noir is making incredible progress towards fulfilling these gaps, and like some of what we've seen in the hackathon was extremely interesting. Like we even as an institution, we've got requirements as it relates to holding assets in a specific manner, in a compliant manner, and there were teams who were essentially utilizing some of these primitives that Noir was presenting to actually put forth really good solutions that could probably actually replace, hopefully at some point, the centralized intermediaries that we have to use today to essentially fulfill these requirements on the compliance side, but also on the privacy side. Like let's be honest, I think we have to use centralized venues because we need to make sure that we have a good way of mixing funds, if anything. That's something that we care about, not just because not because we're criminals, but just because we care what information we are disclosing. So there's a lot of these workflows, but also a lot of workflows on the hiring side, on the lending on the lending marketplace, on identities that were really very, very interesting unlocks that we could actually see happening at these hackathons. And now the question herein is whether these builders have, I guess, the resources and the grit to kind of take this forward and actually build companies from these propositions, because from what I see, there is a little bit of difficulty involved with the tooling, but I think as a founder, if you have the grit and the capability to take it ahead, I think the tooling is at a good enough place that you can actually start building very, very sustainable and viable companies and venture-backable companies.
Well, I think that's one of the powerful things about Noir, right? It's not just a programming language for Aztec, which would be like a very kind of specific group of people working on the tooling. Noir is this like universal programming language that can be used across any EVM chain, and then there's verifiers in like various states of development across Solana and Sui and Aptos, and we just have like a huge developer community now that can contribute to improving the language. So I think it's just like so cool that the Aztec builder experience will just be influenced and made better by all of these folks coming together and building the tooling. If they see something that's missing, they could just like put it out there. I think that's a great thing about crypto in general, but even more so for Noir because we've taken this approach of making it kind of back-end agnostic. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe one other area I personally find very interesting is like more industrial applications, and particularly around data centers. So it seems that a lot of people are very concerned about keeping model weights secure and also preventing external actors to mess around with like poisonous code injections, manipulating the data sets or model weights in any way. Cryptography obviously is a solution to that. So that is a real, very immediate problem with large economic value. So if anyone is interested in that problem space or working on solutions, very eager to explore.
Yeah, I was actually going to see if you had any other verticals that you are thinking about. I mean, you can go on if there's others that come to mind, but like types of apps or verticals that are using ZK or even just like cryptography generally that you'd want to invest in.
I mean, we've made a broader bet on applications that are leveraging, I guess, the underlying infrastructure of what you might call TLS notary or ZK-TLS. If I probably not like to call it ZK-TLS, but whatever. I mean, again, this just basically is a reiteration of the points that I was making earlier, that you can essentially have rails that you can utilize to prove actions that you have done in the real world or attributes that you have in the real world and use that as a mechanism to verify that on a decentralized network like Ethereum. And what that actually brings you is the ability to bypass a lot of the centralized intermediaries like the IDV providers or a lot of the underlying banking infrastructure providers and some of the non-banking financial institutions and some of the onerous cost structures that they impose. And you can use the fact that you can verifiably represent information on chain and replicate a lot of the flows that you have in the real world. And we've made investments in this category. We are extremely bullish on applications that can leverage blockchain rails to help bypass the hurdles that people face when they are looking to build companies in these sectors. And so that is something that we will want to keep continuing to invest in. And I guess to Alex's point, I think cryptography is a very fundamental tool. And as we see more utilization of AI in multiple spaces, I think the question that we are grappling with is making sure that you have people who can actually pay for using this cryptography, and you can create products that the people will be very happy to utilize. And as long as we are putting these techniques to use in building products and ultimately companies that people will value, that is something that we'd be very, very happy to explore.
Yeah, I'd be very, very happy to see this being built. I'd probably not invest in something that makes this their core value proposition. I'd rather like to see this integrated in some kind of a high utility service. So there are a lot of problems to be solved around agent-to-agent communication, payments, orchestration, delegation, basically. So we've seen a bunch of projects building infrastructure in that area. But didn't invest because we think it's more feature than a business, and probably needs to be integrated by either one of the like AI incumbents or somebody who's building marketplaces for these things and offering such utility on the side. But I'm very happy to be convinced of the contrary, taking a very serendipitous approach in general.
Another thing that came up is compliance. Obviously, that's something that folks have to think about a lot with privacy, just because it's kind of the Wild West. Like there aren't really things that they can look to and reliably have guidance from regulators at the moment. Are there things that you're watching out for, like headwinds or tailwinds that are informing the way that you approach the space? I mean, it was encouraging even just seeing in the U.S. there's a lot of progress now with stablecoins. How far out are we from having regulation on on-chain privacy?
Yeah, I think it's a totally mixed bag. On the one hand, what's going on in the US is basically a rolling back of previous regulation through enforcement, right? So most of this have been SEC or other authority actions, not that much legislation in either direction. Even until today, we are basically getting a pause from the harassment that the industry has been seeing from the US government, but it's not clear yet that there will be more friendly and sustainable legislation be taken. So that's still a question mark, and if we're unlucky in 3 years, the next government is coming into existence, we might get some headwinds again. The other piece is that's more subtle, I would say, and less discussed in media, but especially in Europe, very surprisingly, we had the GDPR and overall high sensitivity for privacy, also given lots of experience with authoritarian systems, being in Berlin now. There's a long history and people are aware and more sensitive than many other people in the world. However, there is a tendency already in the UK and on a European level to roll back some of these rights, basically. I forgot what the act was called, but in the UK there's a new surveillance law in place that basically forces companies to screen any kind of communications and content for illegal content. It's basically a backdoor justifying mass-scale surveillance, and I think there are similar tendencies on European level. So, as I said in the beginning, like the more you get in an era of more geopolitical tensions and conflict, the more control I think the governments in general are trying to get over their populations, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, that's particularly tough as a UK-based cryptography company to see. You can imagine a lot of opinions about that internally at Aztec, and it's just ironic for a country that's like celebrated cryptographers in its history to kind of have such a whiplash, or not a whiplash, but I guess the pendulum swings over time. That's your point, going from one extreme to the other, and I think we're unfortunately on the other side right now.
I'm hoping that the more the widespread proliferation of AI might get people to recognize that privacy is something that they have to take into account and take into account very seriously, especially now that you do see that a lot of these organizations are fundamentally scrambling in a war to gain access to as many resources that are broadly available about ourselves across different domains, across different forums online, so to speak. So it's helpful, for instance, that companies like Apple have made their stance on privacy a lot more public, which gets people to recognize that, and hopefully that what they're holding on to, like their information, their workflows, are things that are broadly of value to a lot of these companies. And so with more AI pervading our lives, I'm assuming, or I'm hopeful that the narrative around privacy will take a turn for the better, and people will actually choose to recognize that as a fundamental right.
Yeah, that's ultimately learning through pain, right? So now that the costs of attacking a large group of people with AI tools is dropping so drastically, there will be a lot of people getting hurt, and that might be a wake-up call to improve the entire fabric of comms and transactional system. Yeah, that's a good point.
So we're nearing the end of our time. Before we close out, do you have any advice for folks in the company, in the crowd that are thinking about starting a company and might be thinking about how to approach their investors and folks that they want to pitch for what they're building?
I guess I would probably say if there is a mechanism for you to actually incorporate privacy in a manner that makes sense for your end users, I think that is something that you have to hone in on and highlight very much as part of what you're looking to build. Unless you're a deep tech company or essentially doing research on paradigms that are enabling a whole new point on the trust envelope, building deep tech companies is not for the faint of heart. I think it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and in general, I think that there has to be more or less a congruence in terms of the broader tailwinds and the narrative and the technology to all come together, which is going to be extremely important for you to focus on as a more research-oriented company. But as long as you see a feasible timeline in terms of actually utilizing the underlying technological primitives that you are building to address customer needs in a manner that clicks for them and will essentially ensure that this is the paradigm that people would want to use, that is something that you need to have a very clear idea in mind about.
Yeah. My only comment would be problem obsessed and know what problem you solve for whom as early as possible. Do as many interviews with potential target groups as possible before touching any code, doing anything. There's this fallacy of somebody called founder ears. So that's a way of being exposed to like feedback from those potential customers and always interpreting it in the most positive way. A trait you need to have as a founder, being irrationally optimistic, but in that circumstance, it should be maximally realistic and truthful. And then also like focus on areas where it's existential to have privacy and not a nice to have.
Yeah, I think my reflection is just things take longer than you expect, and not to chase the shiny object, because I think a lot of the people that are having success in things that are hot today have actually been working on it for a very long time, especially when you're talking about novel cryptography and technology. It's just a journey, so enjoy it and pick something that you're really obsessed about. All right, well, I think that we're going to move on to the rest of the programming. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks you guys for joining.
Thank you so much for having us.
Sweet.